Okay, I want to welcome you to this Housing Issues Mayoral Forum. My name is Judy Smith. I'm the interim director at Homeward. We're going to be being somewhat formal tonight because we will be showing this on MCAT. So we will be asking everyone to speak into the microphone, and we will have structured questions and things like that. So I'll just start us off with a brief overview, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how the structure of the actual forum is going to work. So again, I want to tell you a little bit about CHODOs, because this forum is being organized by the 4 CHODOs here in Missoula. CHODOs are nonprofit housing development corporations, and they were an initiative by HUD that was done in the 80s, really targeting housing for people that were having a hard time finding it in the market. And it's a different array of people. We serve different targets. So for example, Homeward, where I work, is really interested in single parent households and them finding places to live with their kids. And Jim Morton back there with HRDC is particularly interested in working families and low-income families and them finding places that they can afford to buy in the market. And Patty, wherever she is particularly interested in what we call special populations, which means folks that, in her case, are at the Western Mental Health Center needing particular kind of housing. And then Bob here and Jerry are with the Northside CDC, so a geographically oriented community with needs for housing. So what happened is HUD decided to really spend some effort saying we need more housing, let's get some nonprofit developers to going with it, build capacity, give them some resources. So in Missoula that worked very well, as we feel we've done a good job in beginning to start doing some building that some of you have seen around the community. And we could spend some time talking about our developments, but we're really not going to do that. That's what tonight is not about. However, if you'd like to talk to any of us, please do, because all of us are very proud of the developments that we've done. But I think the thing that's really important now that brings the CHODOs together to this mayoral forum is our sense that we still very much have a housing crisis in Missoula. And there are still people who absolutely cannot find the kind of housing that they need for themselves and their families, whether it's home ownership or whether it's rental. And I was talking to Stephanie, asking her to make a sign big enough that people in the back could see. So obviously, I have no clue, do I? I'm sure you can't totally see that. But we tried to hand out something on the chairs that went over some of those same statistics. And just to remind you, and this is no surprise, that the cost of housing has increased very substantially in Missoula in the last few years, and the wages have not increased much at all, which is a particularly important factor for a number of our projects that we work on. The cost of land is one of the reasons that increase has been so significant. The cost of building materials has been a reason why that's been so significant. And in our case, we feel that there's regulations and government policies that are also involved in either making housing more expensive or could make it more affordable for folks. So that's why we thought it would be particularly helpful to have a forum with the mayoral candidates around housing issues and ask them some questions about things that we know that either have helped or perhaps hurt this kind of affordable housing initiative. Some of them are being tried around the country. Some of them we've actually tried here in Missoula. And so that's what's bringing us here tonight. The way the forum is set up is we, as an organizational group, have come up with 6 questions, which I just handed to the folks here at the table. And we're going to ask them to answer those briefly and to go through a order of answering that we hope is moderately random, although it wasn't generated completely randomly. And then that's the first half. The second half, we will ask you all to be doing questions. So if you're interested in doing some questions, we have some paper cards and pencils here if you didn't bring any, and Jerry's agreed to be a runner. He's happy to bring them to you and then pick them up and bring them back to Bob. Because what we'll try to do the second half is take the questions from you and synthesize them or put them together in some way that we can then ask another set of questions up here in the front. So we'd ask you, as you're asking your question, to let us know, are you asking a particular person, or would you like all of the folks that are here in front to actually answer that question? So again, to tell you the format, we're going to ask these folks to introduce themselves. Then there'll be 6 questions that we've come up with that we'll be reading ourselves so that you'll hear them as we ask the candidates those questions. And then when that's done in a fairly short order, we'll open it up to you all. So with that in mind, we have limited the time pretty significantly. This is the timekeeper, Lee. So we're asking each round to be a 1.5 minute answer. And if it turns out that is incredibly impossible, we're all human here, we can have a little negotiation over that. But Lee will be able to hold it up, so when there's 30 seconds left, she'll hold up this one. And when it's all over, she'll hold up that one. And we'd like to start out, as I say, with introductions of the candidates, but just so if there's any questions, if you didn't quite gather that part, I don't want to start without making sure that was clear. So if you need these cards or pins, please let us bring them out to you, because we're really depending on you to come up with questions for at least part of this forum. Okay, with that in mind, if you all will, perhaps this will be the only time we will just go down the row. We'll ask you to spend a minute and a half telling us a little bit about yourself as a candidate for mayor, and since we are here at a housing forum, if there's something you want to start off with around housing issues, that would be great. Oh, the MCAT people really do want you to use the mics, so if you can share those, and I can make this one available too. Someone want this one, or you good? Okay. All right, thanks.
Good evening. Is that on? All right. Good evening. My name is Ann Crowley. I've been on the council for almost 10 years. During that time, I've watched housing become the #1 issue for the council and for this town, especially for the council and the city, about the policies that we promote or don't promote, and the subdivisions or the units that we approve. Let's face it, everyone in Missoula has an opinion about housing. And everyone is concerned, rightfully so, young and old. Walking in tonight, I saw a young woman. She's pregnant and she has a little 2-year-old. What's in the future of those 2 kids for housing? We're all affected by property taxes, what we can afford to buy, and where we can afford to live. So it is of vital importance that we take on the challenge of housing. And we can do that by educating ourselves through a forum like tonight on an ongoing basis. This is an ongoing issue and deserves that kind of attention. We can educate ourselves about our options, develop strategies, and work towards solutions. I want to bring innovation and collaboration to address the needs that we face.
Good evening. My name is Clayton Floyd, and housing is a particularly important issue to me. It's the thing that actually brought me to politics 4 years ago. The area I live in, which is over in the Franklin School area, has been one of those that has been most significantly impacted, I believe, by the redevelopment of Missoula through the tools that we've had in place for the last 6 years. I am absolutely committed to trying to meet the needs of Missoula's low and moderate income families. I believe I was the first one who really raised the issue of whether we were accomplishing that in what we were doing. And I think it's important to examine policy to make sure it is doing what you want it to do, what you expect it to do. I think if you set a policy out there and you never once go back to review to see how it's helping or failing to help, you have failed the population you're trying to help. And I think while I think we've had a lot of good intention in the last 6 years, I think we are in large part failing to meet the need, and the need is growing. So we definitely need to make a commitment and examine the policies and put in place something that will actually get us farther down that road. There'll never be enough funding to meet the need in total, but I think we could do a lot better than we're doing. I want to apologize right now because I'm going to have to scoot through a conflict of scheduling, but I did want to make myself available. I'd be more than happy, however you feel is fair, to answer the questions that Bob could get together with me and time me to make sure I don't get unfair advantage or whatever you think would be appropriate. But I think it's important for you to know how I feel on these things, but I do apologize because I did have another meeting that I had no control over scheduled that I'm supposed to be at now as we speak. But I did want to come down and make you aware that I think it's an important issue. Thank you.
We'll let Clayton exit. That's Bob's. Good evening. My name is John DeRazzi. I am what they're calling kind of the outsider of this campaign for mayor. I am not a politician. I've not been on city council. I've been in business in Missoula for over 30 years. And I guess what I bring to the table is more common sense. The answers, they don't seem to have to be as difficult as everyone makes them. I believe that there can be some simplicity. I've advocated for a single page of rules and regulations for a building permit in Missoula, that if you meet the requirements, you'll get a building permit. It doesn't have to take 3 months or anything, and if you don't meet the requirements, then there's no variances. As far as a major development of some size in some houses, you'll have to make some concessions then as far as density and such. But those concessions should only be made in return for affordable housing for the people. So there's a large issue here. I have 14 years in real estate. I'm an active MLS member. I am a realtor. And so I've seen a lot of changes in the last decade and a half. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jerry Balla. I'm the current ward rep in Ward 4. I've lived in Missoula all of my life. I've been on the council for 6 years, so I've been involved in a lot of subdivision reviews. More importantly, though, what I'd like you to understand is I've been an architect for 34 years. I think when it comes to housing issues, that having worked in the housing field really helps you understand what some of the problems and some of the challenges are. I've worked at least 3 projects for the Missoula Housing Authority over the years, mostly renovating some of their older units when I think were some poor decisions when they initially got started in buying some older units that required a lot of work and led renovation and things like that. More importantly, on the Flathead Reservation for 20 years, I was a project architect for every single housing project that the Flathead Indian Housing Authority put out. We helped them build over 600 units throughout all phases, all areas of the reservation, and in all different types of housing, from single family to rental to multifamily. And I have to take projects through the planning review process down here, so I understand the challenges that builders run in. I think having that experience helps me really understand and deal with the day-to-day problems that our housing providers face. And as mayor, I hope to bring that and plan to bring that experience into City Hall and help you get through some of your problems.
Good evening. My name is Geoff Badenoch. I spent 18 years as the director of the city's redevelopment agency, working in the downtown area and our riverfront. And in that period of time, one of the things that we did at the redevelopment agency is we assisted both the Missoula Housing Authority and some on our own and private sector redevelopment of second story or upper story housing in the downtown. That was where we were able to operate. We were able to get probably 150, maybe 150 units downtown renovated for low-income housing. This is a very difficult issue. If it were easy, we would have had a solution by now. If it could be fixed once and for all, we would have been done with it, and we'd be talking about something else by this time. And if it were simply a market decision, whether the market was going to provide low-income housing, the market would have provided its solution. It might not have been one that we liked, but it would have been provided by now. And that leads me to conclude that our efforts to provide affordable housing and housing for needing populations is going to be both a public and private solution. That's what my background is in, is helping find and form successful public-private partnerships to find solutions.
All right, thank you. Jerry's going to ask our first question, but since we are having a little change in personnel at the front table, let's look at our order of answering. Jerry, if you don't mind, where we have Clayton's name, if you could just hop in there. I realize that is whatever it is. And we'll just skip John until he comes, and then we'll let him pop in when he arrives. Does that work? So, so question one, then starting out with Geoff, and then Luann, and then John, then the other John's not here, and then Jerry. And then we'll see how we catch up. Okay? One thing I forgot to mention at the very beginning, I apologize, and I saw Patty looking at me wondering if I was going to say it, is there are a couple of overall tools that those of us who do CHOTOs are very interested in, and I just want to mention them briefly. So as we do the frame here, you all at least know some of those. And one of them is it's our belief that if you increase the supply of the kind of housing that folks that we work for need, that it'll actually make the cost go down. Now, that doesn't always turn out to be true, but that is one of the things that is a premise of ours, that what we need is more housing for the folks who are in single households who need a place for their kids, and more housing for the folks who are working hard and their wages never go up, so they can't keep the costs that rise with housing, and more housing for the folks, unfortunately, that have special needs problems. So that's one of our premises, that more housing is part of the answer. And then how you get more housing in the sense of for the folks we're talking about is you do things about size. So you're going to hear people like ourselves advocate for small houses on small lots because it takes the cost of the land and the building materials out of it. And you're going to hear us advocate for things like higher density because, again, it takes the cost of the land and materials and spreads it over more units. And you'll also hear us advocate for something that allows us more flexibility on how we meet needs of people, and we'll ask a couple questions about ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So those are the kind of things, but I just want you to know from the perspective of those of us who've called this forum together that we have a sense that what we need is something that the market hasn't been able to deliver for us. We don't need high-end large houses to solve what we're talking about here tonight. That's not to say people don't have a right to live in high-end large houses if that's their decision. But that doesn't address what we're talking about here tonight. So just a little bit of framing up for that, and I'm going to ask Jerry to ask the first question.
All right. Just a clarification here. This contains accessory dwelling units. I just wanted to say we found a definition for accessory dwelling unit, which is a dwelling unit added to, created within, or detached from a single-family structure with a separate entrance that provides basic requirements for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. Okay, so the first question. If a neighborhood plan endorsed the development of accessory dwelling units with design standards, would you, as mayor, support their implementation?
Accessory dwelling units, like mayoral candidates, come in all flavors. There's good ones and there's bad ones. As part of my interest in the urban environment, I travel a lot, and I've been to other cities and I've been to Europe, and I've seen what we're calling accessory dwelling units done successfully. I've also seen them be very disruptive to neighborhoods. The city's responsibility is to make sure that the people's health and safety is protected first of all. That's why we have a city. If the city, in the course of its protecting health and safety, is able to provide for accessory dwelling units that people can live in and that don't visit undue hardships on neighborhoods, then the city should allow it. And as mayor, I think I could support that. My concern is that we have to remember that neighborhoods and the voices of neighborhoods is just one part of the equation. There is a larger overall community determination that needs to be made by the city, and that's the city's responsibility. That's why the city council has the responsibility for taking care of these policy issues.
What I want to address is the way that the question is framed. If a neighborhood plan endorsed the development of these ADUs, and I think that's the key. Up until now, we've been approaching our solutions or our attempts or our experiments as one size fits all across the town. I've been thinking of that what we need to do, because many of the tools that we've been using have been suspended, that we need to go back and take neighborhood surveys. Find out what neighborhoods are interested in having, looking like, feeling like. So if a neighborhood comes forward with a request for an ADU with design standards, and it goes through the process of a public hearing, the planning board, yes, I would support that. Because we need, as I said, we need innovation and collaboration to figure out how to address the challenges that we face. And if this allows us to identify, this shows that we have identified the need for this kind of housing, so then we can go forward with this approach.
Clayton was at the end. You're next.
Jerry's taking Clayton's place, so that wouldn't be, it would be Mr. Dorsey and then Jerry. Dorazzi, sorry.
Thank you. Anyway, well, I am not real familiar with an ADU until I've read it here. I don't know if this has been implemented or tried to be implemented, but like Luann said, of the reading of it, if the neighborhood came forward and was asking for this and the plan was passed as far as all the standard requirements and things, then a mayor would, obviously, should support such a plan for housing. And it also looks like if you toss the coin over and if a neighborhood asked that that not happen, then you would probably have to support that too. I mean, you would, if the neighborhood came forward and said, well, we don't want this, I would say that the other side of the coin is that you'd have to honor that neighborhood's request also. So I wouldn't be implementing things to buck the system or anything like that as mayor. It would be one for community involvement and for a simple solution, like I say, simplicity, I think, would save money. I don't know if we'll ever see it again, but it would probably be nice if a person could buy a lot in Missoula and build a house instead of having to buy a house in someone else's development. Still dreaming, but thank you.
The key to me in this question is if a neighborhood plan endorsed the development, the use of ADUs. And I've been advocating that for quite some time, that if we want to adjust how neighborhoods develop, we need to have a neighborhood plan that has proves that there's been buy-in by the neighborhoods. Most of us, not everybody in Missoula that has bought a parcel of land has bought it under an understanding that there are certain existing zoning conditions on there, and you have bought and invested in that with those expectations. A neighborhood plan would require everybody in the neighborhood to go through a process and to discuss and evaluate what's good about their neighborhood and what they can accept and change. And that's the key to me. I've involved in the north side, west side, and helped going through that process, and they've adopted the concept of ADUs. And I would support that in their neighborhood, and I would support it in any other neighborhood where there's actually an existing plan that that neighbors have got a chance to talk about it and accepted the plan. So that's the key to me, is getting the buy-in from the neighborhoods so you can avoid some of the conflict in changing their expectations after the fact.
So we're going to ask question 2. I'm hoping a couple of you are writing down some questions, and now Jerry's free to come pick them up from you, and we're going to start gathering some up here. So here's our second question from Bob.
Thank you. Many communities have experimented with so-called inclusionary zoning. It can take a number of forms. This question deals with some possibilities and is a 4-part question. The first part, A, would you support a requirement that developments of 5 or more units make 20% of the units affordable to households that earn less than 80% of our area's median income. And I'd urge you to keep the numbers 5 and 20 as placeholders in that. I realize that there could be room for discussion of that, but I think you probably get the concept of what that's suggesting. And I'll continue to go through them all. Since you have them in front of you, you can answer them then in order. The second part of that, would you support such a requirement if it had an added incentive of a density bonus attached to it? The third part of that is, would you support such a requirement if it had an in lieu of contribution option to a city-run affordable housing fund financed by the differential cost of developments that choose not to meet the on-site affordability requirements? And the last part of that is, would you support trying to involve county government in any plans such as these? Is there anyone who wants a clarification on any part of that?
This is an interesting question, the way you've done it. I think the way I'm going to address it is, I really do think that we need to provide permanent affordable housing. That's a community issue. These are certain strategies you could take to create that. I think the county, of course, has to be involved in this. The county and city now are inseparable. We can't move without affecting each other. It's vital that they are involved, and we are involved with them in the development of the future of this town. But to say these specifics, I think that's doing just what we talked about before. One size fits all. I think this is the kind of thing that we have to say, the community supports permanent affordable housing. That's the goal. What are the strategies? How do we get there? I mean, we don't have the market doing it for us, but we bring the market people to the table. We bring the nonprofits. We bring the chodos to the table. And we say, that's the goal. How are we going to do this? We involve the county. I think this part about in lieu of contribution, I think that might have a possibility. But again, I don't think this is the kind of question that you can answer, say, this is the answer. You have to say, this is the goal, and we find the answer.
Geoff?
At my workplace, one of the first things I do every morning is I read a... At my workplace, one of the first things I do every morning is I read a news alert from Google. You can subscribe, and I subscribe to affordable housing as my topic, and Google searches over the world for articles on affordable housing and delivers them to my desktop, and I read them every morning. And inclusionary zoning is something that's been tried in a lot of different communities with varying success. I think it's something that we could look at. I'm more interested in exploring the possibility of incentives as opposed to regulation to bring the market to heal and to help the market solve this problem. I think the abuses that I've seen in some of the communities when I read the news stories, it hasn't been very successful in other places. We have to have a solution that works, and if we do inclusionary zoning, we have to make sure that it's going to work. Yes, the county has to be involved. There's no question. I'm concerned about the in lieu of contribution simply to make sure that it's meaningful. We've had in lieu contributions for our parks. I have not been really enthused by the response. So if we're going to have that kind of cash in lieu of, we have to make sure that it's meaningful. Otherwise, we shouldn't do it.
Thanks. Jerry?
The question as presented, to me, is just too broad to try to respond to in a minute and a half. But I would have a real problem trying to make this an across-the-board requirement. we run into so many different types of subdivisions that I think, again, you have to treat each subdivision on the merits that it's brought before you and what its intent and purpose is and where it's actually located. And I would be interested in exploring the concepts. I think I would want to do it on a small basis to get a feel for how it works before I make it do it on a larger basis. I don't know, I guess I just don't know enough and understand the requirements of the added incentive for density bonuses. My experience with density bonuses, that again, if you don't have buy-in from the neighborhood, you're going to have a tremendous amount of opposition. I like the idea of maybe some kind of an incentive or in lieu to give somebody a reward for doing something. I think we do need to involve the county more in our developments within the city standards. I'm really disappointed in the way the county is developing some of their areas near the city where they have large lots and they haven't really adapted some of the more the smaller houses or the neighborhood centers that we need to be developed in some of those neighborhoods.
When you say 5 units, are we speaking single family? Is this, where it just says the 5 units or
Not necessarily. Could be 5 rental units. What I tried to do is pick a number that was divisible as breaking it down to 1 unit. Right. So we weren't talking about partial pieces 5. Of a unit. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I believe that that a restriction of some for a development of 5 or more would be a very nice thing to be able to try to control cost of at least 1 in that 5 as you have here. If you could ever hold a developer to it, I've known that some of these things are always nice on paper. Some of them are harder to enforce after the fact is done. But yeah, that seems like that would be a sensible thing to do. And I believe that city and county government have to get hand in hand somehow. There's a bridge there still that they need to gap and get working as a whole. I've stated before that the city council and the mayor of Missoula, everything that they do on issues such as this would be a impact on the whole valley. And so city county has to absolutely work hand in hand somehow. They have to make that happen. And like I say, if you could make these things work, it would be supported by me if they could be made to work.
All right, thank you. We have a third question from Jim Morton from the HRDC. Again, encouraging you to be giving Jerry some of your questions.
Good evening. My question deals with what's on the last bullet of our Missoula housing facts. And the question deals with information that was researched by the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. And that coalition found that in Missoula, a person working 40 hours a week would have to earn $12 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at what's called market rent. So my question, given those facts, is would you support, as mayor, a living wage ordinance that is tied to the price of housing? And I think John Engen is the first one.
Welcome aboard, John.
Thanks for having me.
I would
interrupt. I don't think it's fair with Joe.
I was going to defer to the moderator if she wanted to change the.
We'll run a different rotation on this one. So let's just go down to the rotation on question 6. Let's John be last. So just for the answers. So that means Luann is first. Mr. Durazi is second. Geoff Badenoch's third. Almost said Clayton there. Jerry, and then John. But the question is number 3.
This is a difficult question because 50% of the new jobs in this town are retail and service. These are the folks that make the least amount in wages. And these are the people that need the housing. I have supported a living wage in the past. I think trying to do this, you'd have to have more information than just a broad brushstroke of supporting a living wage tied to housing. I think we'd need to have more information before we could make that decision. This is, again, the kind of thing that the community needs to weigh in on. I think education is a key here. You know, there's a kind of a disconnect when you read our consolidated plan and you see the tremendous need in this town, that we have poverty levels that are above many other national cities. There is a tremendous need. But there's a disconnect between that need and community awareness. And I think we need to bridge that gap so that we can support more programs or more proposals that assist the people that aren't making the money to buy the houses that they need.
Geoff is next. Are we going reverse order?
But we're just going to follow this one down here.
Okay. Good thing you're here.
You want me on board now?
Can everyone speak up so we can do microphones? Everyone in the back.
Okay. Well, my understanding of what the living wage ordinance here was for a city government employee or someone that was employed by a subsidized business from the city. So it wasn't going to be the person working the cash register out at Best Buy or anything of what was proposed here before. If this is an asking, can we pay minimum wage of $12 an hour to everyone? I don't think that would be a very feasible aspect of this at all. And so I think that would have to be really redefined completely before it would see any support from me. It would not be a favoritism type thing that I would support if it was only for a small group or anything of that would kind of be against my grain. So I will pass that on now.
I think everyone who's sitting up in the front of this room at this table would be more than happy to tell you that they would not be willing to work for the minimum wage of $5.15 an hour. It's not a wage that anyone can survive on. As everyone else in this room knows, the minimum wage that is currently the law of the land is way too low. It needs to be raised. Can it be raised to the level of $12 an hour in our community? I don't think so. I don't think it's realistic. I think we need to make progress on it. I think it's a national problem. In some areas, the market has responded to it, and the minimum wage in some communities is higher than $5.15 an hour. It's not enough in Missoula. I don't think that backing a living wage ordinance that was tied to housing is a winning strategy, because I don't think it would pass. I think we need to be more realistic in what we try to do in order to make gains in this area. So my answer would be, I would advocate working towards increasing the minimum wage, increasing what people get paid, but I don't think I want to back a losing strategy.
I think we've heard in some of the opening comments that housing costs are somewhat market related. I think we've seen that pretty evident across Missoula as you really study the cost of housing. Well, I believe that wages are also market related. And we can't take a an isolated local economy and start to artificially impose restrictions and requirements on that economy in a local area without forcing people to move outside of the area where the controls are. So I just don't see living wage as being any kind of a win situation if we want to really develop and encourage economic development and businesses in Missoula. If we want to increase the wages, we've got to understand what business needs to operate. And I've been doing that for over 34 years in trying to understand how to set wages. So, I didn't support the original living wage package, and I guess I couldn't support this concept either.
Pardon me, I apologize for being late. I love the theory, can't make the practice work in this case. The notion of especially a $12 an hour living wage is difficult to swallow in a market like this for a lot of reasons. I can tell you that I'm a small business person, and there have been times during the course of owning our business that $12 an hour wasn't being paid to anyone, including the owners, but over time we've managed to make that work. Geoff's right, this is largely a national issue, and I think we need to work on the minimum wage on a national level. I think we can also do some things in terms of raising the wage through the market by encouraging economic development. And we do that in a number of ways that are more or less successful over time. What happens here is I think we create a false expectation, and a false market, and eventually I think things come crumbling down because the math just doesn't work.
Okay, thanks. That's the sort of midway point of the already established questions, and that answer is one of the ones that most of us struggle with all the time, which is, since we're out there trying to get people into this housing and their wages don't go up, then what are we left with? But we just wanted to ask, see if you had any particular response. This one I'm going to ask you is from Homeward, and I'd ask you to listen to it pretty carefully because in some cases some of you might consider it a particularly controversial issue. Would you support an ordinance that requires each ward to provide its fair share of affordable housing, however you want to define? And I want you to hear it's ward. I didn't say neighborhood, I said ward. And you can answer this in the sense of how you would define affordable and how the ward might use a process to come to this, but it's really a concept that we're after in asking you this. In a community where people have shared experience, should they share also answering a problem area like housing? So that's the question to you. Would you support an ordinance that requires each ward to provide its fair share of affordable housing? And that's number 4. So if we take a look here, crossing off Clayton, Jerry, you'd be our first one, and then we just go through the list for question 4. Thank you.
I'm going to have to give you my direct answer on that is no, I would not support an ordinance that requires each ward to provide a fair, affordable housing. Because one, I'm not sure how you would even begin to manage or determine what is fair and how you were actually going to divide up each ward. Each ward is totally different, and you need to address the circumstances in those wards. And again, trying to pass some kind of an across-the-board ordinance that requires certain objectives, I don't think is workable in this community. So I could not support that type of concept.
Okay, so John, you're up. Yeah, that John.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. This is like a story problem, isn't it? Okay, good. I think Jerry's take is pretty accurate. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution to this problem or this question. That being said, I think we do have some opportunities that are discrete in various wards throughout our community. I happen to represent the Rattlesnake, and we've done some housing there that hasn't necessarily been affordable of late, but we've certainly done some housing there. I think we have some real opportunity in lands that can be redeveloped and reused, and those happen to be in some wards rather than other wards. So I think we can, consider the circumstances and the opportunities and try to provide affordable housing based on kind of what's on the ground versus setting a standard that's based on a notion of fairness that may or may not be fair.
Well, I guess simply put, no, I would not try to support an ordinance of that either. The neighborhoods that have had infill impact, they're not real grateful for it right at the moment and things. And like I say before, excuse me, there should be a quality control level put on any affordable housing. You still should be able to have a barbecue in your backyard and a dog if you'd like one. So it would be minimum lot size standards, just bottom line. If not, if you're gonna build 4 houses on 12,000 square feet, 3,000 square foot lots, put a fourplex on it. Call it an apartment building, call it what it is, don't call it a house. So these are some good questions and things that come from a different aspect of things that I have looked at through my side of the ballpark. So I will, I'll see if I can come up with some other answer or questions and such for you guys, maybe to mull over a little bit.
I think this question is trying to get at the need that we're going to face. Again, I think it takes public awareness about the projected numbers of the people who are going to be coming here. I think once the community understands that we are going to be up against a lot of new people coming, and we have accurate numbers, then we can go back to something that we mentioned in the question number 1, a neighborhood plan or a ward survey that says, given this situation, how are the neighbors in this ward willing to address it? We provide guidelines, we provide information, the city does, so that this becomes a community problem and a community solution. We also provide innovative ideas. I mean, we've been doing basically the same thing, trying to answer the same question with the same ideas. It's time for information from outside to help us understand that this is a nationwide problem, other people are dealing with it, and we can address this. But it's going to take more than just, this to me feels like what we've been dealing with, top down. I want to see things come from the wards up.
When I see a phrase like asking wards to take their fair share, it sounds like some wards haven't taken their fair share. And I'm very interested in considering this question from the standpoint of opportunity. At the end of the day, the goal is to provide housing opportunities. It's not anything other than that. That's why we're all here tonight. I know one thing, and that is that I oppose any kind of public policy that results in ghettoizing the poor, keeps the poor or the low-income people in one part of the community as opposed to another. One of the things that you have to remember about housing is that it's more than just where you're located, whether you're in one ward or another. It's your access to services. How far do you have to go to shop? How far do you have to go to get groceries? How far do you have to go for your kids to go to school? How far a trip is it to the doctor? I don't think we'd be doing anybody any favors by putting affordable housing for low-income or income-challenged people at the top of Grant Creek. Their transportation costs and inconvenience are not going to make it worthwhile. We need to focus on This is a community problem, and I think ward boundaries are artificial, and I wouldn't use wards as the way to solve the problem. I would focus on what serves the people who need the housing.
Okay, thank you. The next two questions are somewhat scenarios. Number 5 is, again, homeward, and I will read this one. And again, Jerry's bringing up some questions. If you are mayor and the city council is discussing an ordinance limiting the number of people who can live in a house based on a family definition, that is, that only those who are related by blood and marriage may live together in a single-family home, how would you respond to the city attorney's opinion that this type of ordinance is a violation of human rights as protected in the Montana Constitution? And that's question 5. So we just want to follow the list right here.
As mayor, I think I'd listen to my attorney, and it would seem like deja vu here of an occupancy standard. But anyways, I would not support an occupancy standard in Missoula. I don't think that that the people that do live multiple number of people in single-family dwellings and such, they don't do that as why they came to Missoula. That's not their dream. They do it for an affordability, bottom line. And it all just comes full circle to affordable housing. If 2 college students could afford a house together to live in and go to school and such, I'm sure that 2 college kids would be in that house. Unfortunately, it takes about 5 or 6 in that house to pay for the house rent and such. So once again, when the lawyer tells you that it's against the Montana Constitution, you probably should listen. So anyways, it just comes full circle for affordable housing. They don't do it by choice. I mean, it may seem like a fun thing to do at the time, but they would, I'm sure, love to be 1 or 2 people in a house. So anyways.
Am I next?
Yes, Jeff.
As John observed, people choose to live together in homes for a variety of reasons, and oftentimes it is a matter of affordability. It's a strategy for survival. It's a strategy to find shelter. What's the overriding state's interest? What is the city's interest in who's living under what roof? It's not moralistic. It has to do with health and safety. I mean, it's conceivable you could put too many people into a single-family home and it wouldn't be safe. It wouldn't be healthy. And I think that's a state interest. The city has an interest in that. The other interest, and this is something that enters into the discussion about whether we have an occupancy standard, is tied directly to behavior. Whether people, and I'm going to pick on college students because I live near the university, and we have a lot of issues with university students and partying and whatnot. But it gets down to behavior issues, whether they're partying too much, where they're parking their cars. And I would say that the state and the city's interest in who's living with whom is tied directly, in this case, to behaviors. If they're misbehaving, we have ordinances against that, and we should correct it. But if you have 4 people or 5 people who are living in a healthy environment and they're not disrupting their neighborhood, it's not the city's business.
An ordinance with a family definition came before the Missoula City Council a number of years ago. I was serving on that council. I voted against that ordinance. As mayor, if a similar ordinance came before me and it came to my desk approved, I would veto that ordinance. I believe that there are fundamental human rights associated with where we live and how we live together, and I think the city attorney in this case would probably be right. Having said all of that, Jeff's absolutely right. If there are behavioral issues that we need to deal with, if there are geographic issues, logistical issues that we need to deal with, we can adjust ordinances and enforcement to handle those. But the family definition doesn't fix it, and in fact it raises some questions that I think get pretty complicated especially when it comes to issues associated with step families, group homes. Some of the things that we actually want in our community, I think, start to get limited and get very confused by a family definition.
Luann? It's a little confused, but
You know, let's just say we've been there and we've done that with occupancy standard. What I would consider is we don't even get to this point, that we sit down and we talk about what are the issues: public health and safety, landlord accountability, the impacts of too many people in a house, the destruction of our housing stock. This is the kind of thing where it's a circle. Why are the kids having to go into and live 5 to 10 in a house? How did the rents get so high? You know, there's a lot to this. It's not just, we're taking one shot here. It's a complicated issue. And it's only going to increase because it seems that the university is going to continue to increase its enrollment. They've done some housing. We don't know when the next building boom will happen for them. But this is something that takes people sitting down, looking at the issues and figuring out how are we going to address each of the issues that is connected with this situation. That occupancy standard brought a lot of divisiveness into the town. And I think we have learned a lot from that and would address this concern in a different way.
The occupancy standard is still a discussion we should continue to need to have. I want to address the city attorney's opinion because I've talked to a number of attorneys around Missoula and have received different opinions from different attorneys. Some of them are very highly qualified. I have seen it on occasion that the city attorney renders an opinion based upon what he has viewed as a city council direction, and he makes an opinion trying to support a council action or direction. Sometimes those opinions need to be challenged. The boundary line adjustment opinion was based strictly on a city attorney's opinion without any corresponding legal backup for that. And we are having that discussion now, and eventually we will get a judge's opinion that is a little bit higher authority than the city attorney's opinion. So I think it's a discussion we still need to continue to have. And the problem we have is we've identified what some of the behavioral issues are, but we're having as much problem trying to adjust and control the behavioral issues as we are anything else. If there's a way to control the actions by behavior, I'm all for it, and we can avoid the problem. We need to continue to work on it because it continues to be a problem in our core neighborhoods.
okay, thank you. Now we're at our last question of the organized ones. Patty?
This is a long question, but it requires a very short answer from each of you. I've tried to edit it, but you have the full version, so we're going to stick with that. There's a property in the Rattlesnake that is currently zoned by PUD. It has only 2 permitted uses: a nursing home or transitional housing for the homeless. Occupancy is also restricted by the PUD to 35 persons within the existing building, which cannot be altered by height or footprint. The property has been sold and the building is vacant. Assume that the building is infeasible to renovate. You've all had your own experts come to that conclusion. The new owner has requested an amendment to the PUD to allow demolition of the existing building and construction of 16 new apartments. The surrounding neighborhood is zoned R8, which allows 8 units to the acre, but only in single-family detached homes or duplexes. The PUD site is 2.5 acres, which would permit 20 units if you were to follow the R8 zone. However, only 1 acre of that site is developable. It's the bottom of the ninth. There's 2 outs and the bases are loaded. The public testimony is mixed. Supporters note that the land use will be nearly identical and will replace a dilapidated building with a new one. Opposition is largely based on density. The council is voted and the vote is evenly split. How would you vote? And would your vote change if you knew that this housing would be affordable in perpetuity to persons earning full-time minimum wage jobs? So about $900 a month. Luann, I think you're first.
I'm still reading the question.
Essentially, you have a very restrictive PUD. The building is vacant. It is dilapidated. Someone has come in to change that use. It is an acre that is developable out of a much larger site. Surrounding density is 8 units to the acre. This asks for 16 multifamily units. How do you vote, and does it matter if those units are affordable to people working full-time at minimum wage?
Well, this brings back memories of Rattlesnake Gardens, when we were trying to break new ground by putting a grocery store and possible new development up in the Rattlesnake, and there was tremendous opposition. And I voted for that, and I believe I would vote for this. I'm not sure if I really understand this, but I believe I support the concept, because I think at this point we would have worked to create design standards, allowed for some green space if we can only develop on 1 acre. So this would be acceptable to the neighborhood. And I think more and more it's the way we need to be thinking, and it would make a difference if it were affordable to residents working full-time. Wow.
That's what we
So
do. That's what we do.
So yes.
So is their income 900 a month? Is that what you're saying?
Minimum wage,
Full-time,
full-time is
40 hours.
$892 a month.
Okay. So then at your 41% equation, as banks would use it, then the rent on these places would only be about $365 per unit.
Be a maximum rent. Because HUD, if it were subsidized with any HUD funds, they're looking closer to 30% of income for affordability. So about $300 a month.
Lenders are greedy here. Okay. Well, if and only if this is the solution that has come forward for this 1 acre on 2.5 acres, again, the complications of the question may be to try to just look in a more simpler manner at the question. Are you going to put 16 apartments on 1 acre? Are you going to have enough parking for this and such? Does it meet the requirements as stated by standards and your zoning? And so if you can meet that on your 1 acre, and it's a split the hair vote, the only thing that would probably swing me to do it would be the affordable end of it for the minimum wage person, for a place to live. Bottom line, I think that's the only concession the city should ever make to anybody trying to develop anything, is the give and take. We're going to give you that. Here's what we're going to take back, the affordability of it. That would be the only area I think the city should ever bow down to anybody and give them anything. Never give them nothing. give them, you gotta get something back. Nothing's free. So that's where I would stand on that. Thank you.
There's one indisputable fact in our community, and that is they're not making any more dirt. And if we have an acre of land that's currently occupied by a building whose use is obsolete, whose current zoning restricts it such that it can't be used profitably or helpfully in the community, I would vote along with the side that says to allow the PUD to occur. And let me tell you why. I'm a strong believer that we cannot, as a community, throw away land. We don't have enough of it to do that. We have to use it in such a way as it solves our problems. We have to learn in Missoula the ways to embrace density. We need to learn how to do density well. We're not the first community that's been challenged by this. Communities all over the world are challenged by how we can do density well. It doesn't have to equate to slums. It doesn't have to equate to cracker box construction. It can be done well, and we have to learn how to do that in Missoula. And I think this might be a place to do it. I know it wouldn't be popular. Obviously, if the council is split 50-50, it's not going to be possible to make everybody happy. But I think we have to challenge ourselves to do these things and to try to do them well.
So is that a yes vote?
I absolutely said yes. Absolutely.
Well, I'll give you, my vote would be yes on both, and it wouldn't make any difference as to what the qualifications of the housing is. And this brings back to me the remnants of Apple Grove, and I ended up supporting Apple Grove, and I did it for one reason, is that they made one very small change that satisfied my concept of what it needs to be, and they deleted enough lots so that the lots were wide enough that when they built a house on it, the spacing between the houses ended up being about 10 to 14 feet, and not just the 6 feet that we've seen so far around us in so many places. I challenge you to go out there and visually look at that and trying to visualize the concept of the density, and I think you would appreciate that there are spaces between the houses that give you a good visibility concept. I also challenge you to go out to Briggs Court and look at the 2-story houses that are built 6 feet apart and make your own decision as to whether you'd want to live there or not. So PUD to me envisions that there's going to be some good design in the houses, and I think our Affordable Housing Committee and our SHODOs have been able to build houses that were very nicely designed. They fit into the character of the neighborhood. So my presumption is my vote would be yes, because I believe the design and would be compatible with the neighborhood.
Thank you. My answer would be yes as well, and I'm wondering, do you have an option on that place now?
No, that's one I don't have an option.
Okay. Well, it happens to be real, and it happens to be a place that really needs redevelopment in Rattlesnake, and I think that would be a terrific use for it. So yeah, without equivocation, yes.
Thank you.
So now I'm going to turn this over to Bob, who's been taking a look at the questions you've turned in, and I'm sure he's trying to pull together some tricks out of his hat because there are a number of cards over here.
Let me apologize right away. I don't think we're going to have time to get to all the questions that have been submitted. I've tried to bundle them, and we'll get as many as we can done, but please forgive me in advance if yours isn't. If there's time at the end, we can throw it open to people. The first question, there was actually kind of 3 that are related here, and what's going to take this a little bit of time too is, of course, everybody who submitted a question wants to hear from all of the candidates, so there's no limitation to it. The first is, would you be in favor of a square foot fee on new construction? And that's all new construction, residential, commercial, and industrial. That would be contributed to an affordable housing fund that the city could administer? And a related question to that is even more specific. Would a per square foot fee, would you support it being put into a down payment assistance program? And the other question that's sort of related to that is, would you support regulation requiring retail stores to incorporate affordable apartments for their employees into any construction or remodeling plans? And I don't know what the order is anymore. What do I do? I do know what the order is. We're starting over. Okay. So Geoff is first.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you to give me those. I didn't get them all written down. That's a pretty heavy.
It's the first part of that is a contribution per square foot. Anybody that comes in and pulls a permit would be paying X amount per square foot that goes into an affordable housing fund that could be tailored to any number of different things, including a down payment assistance program. And I guess a second part of that would be the requirement for new construction of commercials to have incorporate residential in them.
Okay, I'm going to need you to remind me again. I'll try to take the first part first. I think we have to be very, very aware when we tack fees onto development, what it does, how it ripples through the whole process. And I would be very concerned about a fee that was added on for this specific topic of affordable housing, unless we had very specific uses that people knew how it was going to be used. I think having a wide open carte blanche, affordable housing that's not directed towards things like maybe land banking or like creating land trusts, things like that. I think people are entitled to know what the fee is going to be used for, and that it not be finding its way into general funds or to use for purposes that it's not intended. So I would want to see some very specific uses apply for that. Second part again?
The retail and including residential.
Would I require new retail users to provide housing? No. I don't know. It depends on the size of the retail. If it was a shoe store, I don't know that a shoe store owner could afford to provide housing. If it were a Walmart, I don't know. I think in some places they're starting to think about requiring that because affordability of housing for the workers is just too steep to overcome. I don't think we're quite there yet. Now, did I get all those questions? Those are.
I think so. Thank you. And Luann is next.
You know, I think this is one of those situations where we decide what the needs are and what the goals are. We can investigate what other towns have done. This sounds like something that maybe Seattle has done, the Affordable Housing Fund. I think Geoff was right in that if we do something like that, it has to be for very specific needs. Again, it's kind of a broad-based solution. It doesn't seem to have any context here. This would have to be in the context of a plan that approaches the need and what are the different ways that we are going to address affordable housing. I mean, it's really difficult to just pinpoint one. We tried retail housing with Safeway. What we ended up with was getting some on the back of the parking lot. And we had to work really hard for that. I think it's a great concept. Again, let's look at what other towns are doing, what fits for us. But let's use our brains to figure out how to be creative in getting that mix together, because this is where we're going to save gas money, we're going to save air, vehicle miles traveled. That's an important concept we need to investigate. And now what I do is this.
Paper towels or anything back there? It was bound to happen sooner or later.
Yeah.
Jerry, are you?
Thank you.
Luann, are you finished?
Yes.
Your part? Okay, Jerry's next.
No, John is
We're on the question 7 category now, right? Yes. Okay, yeah, this is Floyd here.
That's really hard to swallow.
Want a little more water? I guess it's my turn. Well, as stated before, the fee, they never seem to go where they're designated to. So it would be just another part of an impact fee, as people want to call them, taxes for fees. It's just another word they say for it. Your developer will probably be a little bit miffed by more fees. I know that the impact fees and things were just renegotiated, I believe. Is that correct, kind of? For new development, the impact fees were increased, and your permit fees and such have gone up. They've gone up quite high. And like I say, as stated, there would be so hard to control to keep some greedy little fingers off of that money from going somewhere else that probably not very feasible. As far as housing, I didn't know, Bob, if that was directed for large chain stores as a Walmart or such, or if it was just...
I don't know either. The question does not specify that.
Okay.
That was turned in.
You know, I mean, if you're dealing with a multi-billion-dollar corporation, there might be negotiations before you let them open their doors here to give compensation to their employees related to housing costs in Missoula, you know, to negotiate that for them. Thank you.
Question number 1, I think I'd have to ask that pesky city attorney. We're only allowed to use impact fees, for example, on new construction in very specific ways, and only for capital improvements, some rolling stock and some land purchases. So I'd need to know whether that is a legal option for us. Having said that, there might be some difficulties in charging a square foot fee on new construction to create affordability, because the house you just created may become less affordable because of the fee that's associated with the new construction. That's one marginal complication that could come into play. Having said all that, I think there may be reason to figure out some ways to incorporate affordability as a function of projects, and that might be a more appropriate way to deal with that question. Question number 2, no, I would not require retail to provide housing, but I think we could figure out some ways to experiment with live-work situations, especially in downtown areas where it's very desirable to have retail on street level and office or residential dwelling up above. And that may be some real opportunity for us to create situations that are similar to that.
The next question.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jerry.
Yeah, Floyd.
I guess I look at another square foot fee or impact fee. It's just, to me, it's another tax. That fee or tax is going to be passed on to whoever's buying the home, and all you're doing the building, all you're doing is making that more expensive and more unaffordable. And when you make that, then you're making it more attractive for those people to go down the valley and buy something someplace else where they don't have to pay the fee. So to me, it's a item that's going to make it less attractive to try to build here, and it's going to encourage people to move out farther. So I would not support that type of tax on any kind of construction. And trying to attach housing to commercial, there are so many different forms and places where commercial, you wouldn't want a housing every place you could put a commercial building. I would be more in favor of, again, providing some incentive to encourage people that want to build a commercial building to provide houses, but I would also try to identify those areas where we think it would be most appropriate for the housing to be, so that it would be close to the services that a house needs.
Thanks. We hear a great deal about affordable housing and the need for it, but we don't hear as much about the need for affordable, accessible housing. How do we get that? And that would include housing for the elderly, who are now 1 in 8 of the population. Lou Ann?
I believe that's your job. The senior population is going to increase dramatically, and our disabled community, that's probably going to increase as well. We have CDBG funds, we have home funds. Those are the places we need to support to provide this kind of housing for us. I think, again, it's figuring out the strategy that we want to take to provide affordable housing across the board. And as Geoff mentioned, affordable housing is not just the housing. It's the services that those folks need to have a livable life. So I would support focusing, as the need increases, focusing the support for the CDBG monies towards those housing projects.
John Engen?
Thank you. One of the ways we deal with these issues is, and Lou Ann suggested it, folks advocate, and folks tell us what the need is, and we respond to those needs, I think. And I think we've done that pretty successfully with a number of community partners. And I think the market will largely dictate how we move forward, and I think we need to respond to that as quickly and as best we can based on the need that's brought to us by the community.
Well, I think the problem is just the opposite. I don't think the market itself wants to respond. I think that that's one of the reasons why some of the accessible projects that we see in Missoula, the Blattner Apartments and Eagle Watch Estates, for example, were funded through partnerships that were largely supported through public investment of public dollars, because the need was not being met by the marketplace. And I think that that's an important consideration. I think this may be one of the areas where it's a combination of incentives to the marketplace and requirements of the marketplace. It may be that in a multifamily apartment building, we can have requirements that a certain number of units be accessible. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act that guides a lot of the construction of housing today. And it may be that requiring a certain percentage of the units to meet a little bit more strict accessibility will do what Judy suggested earlier, and that is increase the inventory of accessible units, and by increasing the inventory of units, the number of units, we can affect the affordability of those units.
My understanding of the current ADA and the fair housing market is that any multifamily housing is already required to be accessible to a certain percentage. So the law already addresses that. So the only portion of the law or the market that isn't is single-family housing. And again, I think single-family housing designs and need, for the most part, need to be addressed by market demand. If the city finds that we are not addressing the need by market demand, then the city needs to find a way to help developers achieve that need. And that's where we start to use our designated funds that we're getting from the federal government, is we can address those to the specific need for that housing. Fortunately, I think our current housing market doesn't develop too many single-family houses, and maybe we need to look more at that option and try to encourage more single-family housing developments that can be sold to individuals.
Well, I would look at, I think, an old nursing home up the Rattlesnake real quick for maybe a development for an elderly, small elderly or senior center for, or not center, but apartment with your accessible, all the accessible equipment installed, all the ramps and everything. That your senior housing and such is going to be, that's going to be a huge issue, and it's going to concern all of us sitting up here and all of you sitting out there one of these days. So there has to be some answers. There has to be somehow a piece of land here and there has got to be designated and controlled, hopefully, by city government that can maybe do a little something right once with some real estate, but to designate things that this is a large issue, and that needs to be addressed in development that's always goes ahead of what seems to be afterwards. The questions come up, and how did that happen, and where did this go wrong, because that's not exactly what we were planning on with that. So there should be a direct, just a full, excuse me, the word's gone from my head, but for it to, yeah, been there, done that, but for them to actually, to address that completely. Thank you.
Thanks. I have a request from Jamie Hoffman, who has a question, but he wanted to put up a display. Is he still here? So while you're doing, is that, yeah, okay. This is, again, for all. Would you support a program of regular inspections of older rental residences for code compliance as rentals? Should that be attempted before considering an occupancy standard? And I'll join another question to that was a broader question about code enforcement, everything from parking on lawns to people sleeping in vans and alleys. It's just very broad ranging. So code enforcement is the theme. And our first would be John.
Actually, I like that idea, the code enforcement question, and it gets to the heart of some of the issues that are associated with safety in some of these rental properties. In fact, I was recently reading a piece of legislation from another community that engaged in exactly that, and it made a lot of sense to me. It's going to come with some expense, and figuring out a way to pay for that is an issue, but we can probably work our way around that. And we have to work through the notion of landlord licensing. The courts have not smiled upon that notion in our community, so we'd have to deal with some issues associated with that, but I like that. What was the second piece, Bob?
Should code enforcement precede any discussion of occupancy standards?
I think that'd be a terrific predecessor to that discussion.
And the third part was kind of the broader, kind of the police enforcement issue.
And what was the question?
The question was,
should we do that?
Should we concentrate more on that?
I think to the degree that we can apply resources to deal with some of those neighborhood issues, we ought to do it. We've ramped it up a bit over the last year, and I think we should probably try to continue to do that until we find an acceptable level. Again, it's all about balancing resources.
Jerry is next.
John.
This is
Okay, question 3.
Okay.
Yeah, 9.9.
Down to 9. I think I got lost halfway through that question there somewhere, Bob, but you were talking about older homes to be...
Let me repeat it for you real quickly.
Okay.
Would you support a program of regular inspections of older rental residences for code compliance as rentals? Two-part here, should they be attempted before considering an occupancy standard? And the third was kind of the police enforcement question.
Okay. If, as John said, if there was a budget to set that program up, that would be a wonderful program to keep rentals in code. I mean, you've got fire code, you've got safety codes, you've got things there that it would be a wonderful world if you could make it all come around for code inspection. And it would be a matter of budgeting it somehow. The occupancy standards to proceed with this, yeah, you have a base there, I would say, I guess, to start from. And it would all relate back still for your occupancy standards to the health department, as stated earlier. For real enforcement of a occupancy standard would be through health department. And the police and such, they're relatively understaffed and undermanned and underfunded right now, and so there would have to be the monies found for this program and enforcement, but perhaps the fines could be relatively large enough to compensate the enforcers.
This is a critical life safety issue for me, and I'd answer yes to the inspections. When I was sitting on working on the Habitat for Humanity board, we would go out and interview people that were looking for habitat houses, and some of the deplorable conditions of the houses that we went into were enough to turn your stomach. So I think there's a critical need to have inspections of rental units, however we go about doing it. Really have a problem. We allow students that we invite into this community, and we know that some of them, a lot of them are living in basements without egress windows, and we know that that's a hazard. And so I think we do our student population a tremendous disservice if we don't have some way of making sure that the places that they live in actually comply with the codes. I would deem it a higher priority than the occupancy standards, and anytime you're dealing with a life safety issue, it's a higher priority, and we need to find a way to fund it. For the livability issues, I started to make a process. I drive around my neighborhoods and I start to see people parking on lawns and that, and I don't have any qualms about calling them in and asking the enforcement officer to go out there and take a look at it. And I've been successful in 3 or 4 cases of finally getting cars off of lawns and getting them back onto the street. So that is something we need to continue to do too.
As I've said a number of times tonight, the city's overriding interest in any of these issues has to go back to the fundamentals of health and safety. I think it's criminal that landlords be able to accept rental fees for residences that are not safe, whether it's the wiring, whether it's a hole in the roof or a hole in the floor or the plumbing's not right. That's criminal. I don't think that anyone should be allowed to take advantage of the community that way. And I think that having an inspection program that made sure that the housing that was offered for rent was decent and healthy that's just a fundamental. I agree with some of the earlier comments about that. Do I think it's more important than dealing with code enforcement? I do. I mean, more important than occupancy standards, yes. I think it is more important and it is a higher priority. Lastly, about this issue of behavior, and I appreciate what Jerry said about going out and hassling the people who are getting the inspectors or the police to hassle the folks that park on the lawn. But I'm going to say something a little bit different. I think that one of the things that we as a community have to do is start to get a grip on expecting less from your government in terms of being able to call the cops to solve all the problems. Some of these issues, we simply have to take responsibility for ourselves. Now, as I said earlier, I live in the university neighborhood, and there are parties, and they go late. And when they go late, I go talk to them. I don't call the police to do it. But I don't expect Louise, my elderly next-door neighbor, to do it. I take responsibility on her behalf to go do that. And I think we all have to take some responsibility for the quality of life in our neighborhood. I'm not suggesting that anybody go take a poke at somebody that's making noise, but I think we have to know our neighbors. I think we have to take responsibility to make sure that our neighborhoods are livable.
We passed a rental licensing ordinance. And one of the points of doing that was to create a fund to start inspecting our rentals, because we realize how important that is. The power to license rentals was not taken away by the courts, but by the legislature. That says to me we didn't do a good enough job of working with landlords to create a way for them to be willing to have their places inspected. The Missoula Housing Authority inspects all their property before they allow people to live there. We need to find a way to do that. And we could contract with them, create a whole new group of jobs for people, because we have plenty of rentals that need to be inspected. One thing about the occupancy standards, during that community conversation, what came out of it was a quality of life officer who has been extremely effective in helping neighborhoods connect to landlords, connect to property managers, to allow some kind of accountability by landlords. And that's what we're trying to find through any kind of rental licensing or any other program we promote.
This is Jamie Hoffman's question, and are you going to need? I'd ask you to be very brief if you explain whatever that is. The question is, because it sort of gives you an unfair advantage of it. The question is, what is the public benefit of the moratorium on PNCs in multifamily zones?
What I put up on the wall there is a city zoning map in which I have marked in orange all the multifamily zone lands in Missoula, lands that allow for higher density housing development. PNCs were adopted, planned neighborhood clusters were adopted 5 years ago to foster more flexible land use planning and to entice infill development. A year ago, a moratorium was placed on PNCs of 5 units in smaller projects. On the left there, on the upper sheet, is a 4 single-family detached housing project on a lot on 14th Street. That was a PNC. It's just being finished. Its construction is just being finished. It's zoned though it's zone B and allows 10 studio apartments. You can't do that today. That's to say, you can't do the 4 single-family homes for sale, but you can do multifamily on the parcel. So what's the public benefit in a moratorium on an ordinance that fostered small houses on small lots for sale on property that's already scheduled for higher density housing?
I think Jerry's first.
You're right. I guess the main purpose of it is the PNC had generated so much adverse publicity and reaction in the community that I think the majority of council felt that we needed to just sit back and take a look and really rethink what the purpose of it is. I guess I would have a difference of opinion of that when I look at that type of housing and I start to realize that those are 6 foot apart. I guess I honestly don't feel that that's the best living environment that we can create, and I would prefer us to see us consolidate the building into one building and give us a little more yard and open space around it, and utilize the area of the building to do a condominium type of it, rather than trying to force individual housing. So I think there's a difference of opinion on how to develop things, but the main purpose of putting the moratorium on it was to give the city a chance and the community a chance to sit back and take a deep breath and really maybe think about how we're going to utilize that PNC comment process, because it has had such a bad reaction throughout the majority of the community.
John?
Jamie, your question is what's the public good that's served? I don't know. I didn't support the moratorium on PNCs. I think PNCs got a bad rap. A planned neighborhood cluster allows us to use land well, I think. It allows us to be creative in the use of the land. It allows us to have more predictability than we would otherwise have, and I think your example here illustrates that. And I think that in certain circumstances, houses that are, I don't know how many feet apart these are going to be just fine for the folks who are going to buy them. One of the things that I think we struggle with, and one of the things that I don't necessarily agree with, is that we all need the same kind of house at every time in our life. We all need the same kind of residence. I don't think that's the case. I think these are homes that are perfect for some parts, for some members of our community, and maybe not so much for others. There are folks who live in luxury condominiums in the Rattlesnake that are separated only by walls and no green space, and they really don't have yards per se, and that works very well for them. I think PNCs are one of the ways that we can take advantage of our precious land in smart ways.
Well, as Jerry said, that it was a public outcry against it. That was where this moratorium came from, I believe. As I said earlier, I'm not on council or involved with city government, so their motive or anything behind that, Jamie, I have no idea. So I don't think I'm supposed to know that either. Nobody will tell me these things ever. Nobody tells me these things. But I think that the concept is good. And back to the quality control would be, as Jerry said, a little more yard, a little more here, a little more there, a little more give and take and such that, there's nothing wrong with them. They're a house. They are single family homes. So the design of it, it would be nice. It brings me back again to something I said earlier, though. It'd be nice if those were, say, 6,000 square foot lots and they were for sale to the public instead of the person that bought the old thing. And this probably comes under some scraping and stuff now too of what the council has just addressed. I mean, for how to get that open of a lot again, is maybe there was an old house in the middle there and it was taken out. And so I like I say, this needs to be done. It just needs to have quality control.
You, Jerry. I'm sorry, Luann.
Okay. Let's go back to what Jamie called this, a planned neighborhood cluster. We don't call it planned neighborhood clusters anymore. We call it planned neighborhood development because we weren't getting any planned neighborhood cluster. A cluster gives you the impression that you've got a cluster of homes and you get open space. We weren't getting that. So instead of improving the planned neighborhood cluster and asking for what it said, we changed the name to accommodate what was going on. And the reason we stopped was because we represent the people that vote us in. We are paid by the citizens of Missoula. They came into the city council chambers and told us again and again that they didn't like what they were seeing and they wanted us to stop. So we did. Now's our opportunity. As Jerry said, step back. We have affordable housing as a challenge. We develop strategies, and we work from the neighborhood plan. This neighborhood, I'm sure they had a meeting. I'm not sure what kind of input they had into this development. But this is what we're talking about, going back and saying, what is coming out of the neighborhoods that's going to support this? We need this kind of development, but we need neighborhood support for it as well.
Thanks. As Geoff, the question is, again, what is the public benefit for the current moratorium in multifamily zones?
Well, I don't know if there is a lot of public benefit. I think this is just another example of where there's been a lot of public heartburn. That's a lot of orange on that map. That's a lot of orange where providing and using tools for affordable housing can't even be considered. And this harkens back to a theme that I've had throughout this campaign about policy making. What Luann described was simply the curse of unintended consequences. The community spent a lot of time trying to figure out PNCs. We had a long discussion about it. We codified it in the laws and the zoning codes, and we said it could be there, and it wasn't what we wanted. And it took a hue and outcry from the community to have the council step back and create a situation where a tool that can be used to create affordable housing is not available on all that orange. I'm not altogether sure that's the way the city should function. We should know what it is we want to get out of these plans, out of these codes, and we should direct the codes and write them in such a way as that we get what we want. And we should be clear about it.
Thanks. We're getting to winding down here where we should probably just do one last question. And before I give you that question, I will make note that there were 3 or 4 cards addressing economic development. Again, we keep concentrating on affordability of housing, but what we really need to talk about is economic development. And I think you've already all sort of addressed that to some extent, but for the remainder of your campaigns, you should remember that people are very interested in economic development. This is the last question. Missoula is growing. All candidates agree that neighborhoods should direct their own destinies. But isn't the message from every neighborhood, quote, the growth should happen in other neighborhoods, end quote? How, as an official representing the entire city, do you find a path through this gridlock? And our first, it would be John DeRazzi.
What a wonderful question to end this with, Bob. Well, I think that that the city on a whole has to get a grasp on what its plans are. The council represents their wards. They take that forward to city council. Like you say, not in my backyard, please, and it's okay over there, but don't do it over here. So you do have to have, but once it got over there, those people weren't happy with it. So for you to find the neighborhood that will acknowledge the need for it and for them to come forward as a whole, as earlier on in one of your questions, would be probably the only way that you can keep people happy with this, would be by the neighborhoods coming forward and saying, okay, we don't mind if you build X amount right here. You know, we give you this much space out of our niche in life, and we don't mind that. So I don't know if the city could force that sort of an issue anywhere to anybody. So you're going to have to go almost back to square one on the zoning itself. If everybody got a call, you know, like their own shot of what their neighborhood should be, we'd all be leaving, you know, we'd all be living in Stevensville, I think. I mean, if that really were what was happening, they wouldn't let any more housing in. So we've got to be careful of how we do it and to just try to keep everybody happy. It will be a juggling act.
Geoff Badenoch.
I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question that we all agree that neighborhoods should set the destiny. And the reason why I say that is that as I've been out talking to people and visiting and knocking on doors, I've yet to find a neighborhood that speaks with one voice. I find a lot of different voices going on coming out of neighborhoods. There are people with all kinds of different values scattered throughout our city. And I've yet to find the neighborhood that speaks with a single voice. And there's a reason why a city governs itself the way it does. I believe neighborhoods should have a voice. I believe that they should have an input and help us learn what their issues are in the neighborhood. But the neighborhoods don't get a veto. The neighborhoods get a voice, but they don't get a veto. Their voice should be heard by the city, but the city, through its 12 elected council people and its mayor and its staff, through its staff work, should refine and distill these issues down to something that's manageable, that's good and fair for the city. That's our role. We're not at the beck and call of neighborhoods. We're at the beck and call of our city.
And Jeff and I think, have shared a similar experience, and I find that no, neighborhoods don't generally speak with one voice. Another premise of the question is the notion that there's gridlock, and I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with that either. I can tell you that one of the things that I think gets us moving forward as we talk about growth is taking advantage of the best and most practical opportunities that are before us. These days, in my experience on council at any rate, those opportunities come from two places. One is bare land, and one is through redevelopment. When we do subdivisions on bare land, we have pretty good luck in making fairly dramatic impacts in terms of sheer volume of houses pretty quickly. That is, when we do a 500-unit subdivision, we can usually get that done a lot faster than we can get a house plunked in a backyard. And for my money, that's the horse I'd bet on. The other opportunity, as I've suggested before this evening, is redevelopment. We have parts of our city that are ripe for redevelopment. And that could be residential redevelopment, it could be commercial redevelopment, or it could be a combination thereof.
As I've sat on the council for all this time, what I've come to hear when folks get up at the mic, they say, I understand that we're going to grow. I understand that there's going to be development. You know, this whole idea that everybody's saying not in my backyard, I don't believe that. Because I can think of Emma Dickinson. Those folks were annexed into the city, and within a few short years, there was tremendous development there. And every time they would get up, and they'd say that. It's not that I am against growth, but they asked that we be sensitive to the character of their neighborhood, that what they got was predictable. Developers want predictability, they tell us. Well, so do neighborhoods. They wanted us to appreciate what was going on and the change that they were undergoing. That happened out in Mullen Road not too long ago, when this 544 lots went into a place where people were living on 17,000 square feet. They had the same reaction. We understand that there's going to be growth, but we want our concerns to be addressed. I believe when people feel they've been heard and that we are sensitive to their situation, then they are much more willing to accept what is coming.
You know, neighborhoods may not speak through one voice, but they do speak through a vote in an election. And if you've been through an election and a re-election, you find out pretty quick about what your neighborhood will support and what it won't support, and and you have to listen to it, and that's when you find what the majority, at least the majority of your neighborhood wants. It's very easy to start talking about we doing this and the people doing that, and the proof in the pudding is when you come to an election and a re-election, you find out whether people are really supporting you. And since I've been through both, I think for the most part I do speak for the majority of my ward. And that's why I think if we're going to do something in any of the neighborhoods, we need to have a neighborhood plan where there is substantial buy-in by the majority of the neighborhoods. We don't go out and start changing neighborhood character without getting that buy-in first. What we do have to do is look for those opportunities on open spaces of ground, such as the mill site and the Intermountain site, and maybe even taking the old Forest Service compound out in 14th Street and figuring out how we can develop that for housing, and look for those opportunities where we can put in well-designed, denser housing that doesn't change the basic character of a core neighborhood.
Thank you very much to all the candidates. Again, I apologize to anyone who submitted a question that I was unable to get to, but maybe you can grab the candidates before they leave and pull them aside and get some answers.
I was just going to say that we actually have the room for another bit of time. So our idea was we invite you to find the candidates and visit with them. And also another very important announcement, we have quite a bit of food left, and we'll put it up on the table. If anybody'd like to take it home, it's from the Peas Garden. So it's veggies of all different kinds, and if you'd like to take any with you home, we'll just put it out here on this table. So please stay. Thanks so much for coming. Remember also to vote September 13th for one of these folks, or Clayton, who isn't here too, one of these 6 folks, and then we'll be on to the next round. Thanks so much.